Serious, what is your creepiest/most unnerving experience? When I was 15, I lived on a remote ranch while taking care of my great-grandmother. The only signs of life were occasional cars passing on the highway down the hill and a neighbor who lived miles away. One night, around 2 a.m., someone knocked on the door. A man stood outside asking to use our phone. The problem was, we didn't have one. No landline, no cell service, no internet. To even reach the house, he would have had to climb the hill and pass through 2 locked gates. My heart was pounding. I told him, trying to sound braver than I felt, "No. Go away. I have a shotgun." He paused for a moment, then turned and disappeared back into the dark. I spent about a year in Thailand when I was around 8 years old. During the New Year celebration, Songkran, a big truck full of people pulled up near where we were standing. Out of nowhere, a woman jumped off, smiling, and walked straight toward me. She grabbed my arm tightly and started pulling me toward the truck. I was confused and didn't really resist. I just remember her grip being strong as she tried to guide me up. She had almost gotten me onto the truck when my brother came running over, asking where I was going. The moment he showed up, the woman let go, climbed back on, and the truck quickly drove away. At the time, I didn't think much of it. It wasn't until years later that it really hit me how close I had come to being taken, alone, in a foreign country, and without fully understanding what was happening. I took a photo of my friend on the first day in my new place. He'd helped me move, and afterward we were just relaxing, having a couple of beers and unwinding. Eventually he headed home, and I went to sleep, exhausted from the move. The next morning I woke up to find the place completely cleaned out. My TV was gone, and all the electronics I hadn't unpacked yet had disappeared too. The front door was slightly ajar. Someone had clearly been inside during the night. A few weeks later, I was scrolling through my photos from that day. That's when I noticed something strange, a foot sticking out behind my friend in the picture. At first I thought I was imagining it, but there it was. It was coming from a large overhead storage shelf in a small storage room, one that faced into the room but was hidden from the main living space. It hit me all at once. Whoever robbed me had been hiding there before I even finished moving in. They must have been watching us the whole time, waiting until we left or fell asleep. I still have the photo somewhere. One night, back when I lived in the city with a roommate, I came home late. The key for the front door never worked, so I always had to go around to the back entrance that led straight into our kitchen. The door had that frosted, blurry glass window, so you could see shapes but not details. As I was turning the key, I saw a figure move quickly past the glass. I didn't think much of it. I just assumed it was my roommate walking through the house. I went straight to my bedroom, dropped my stuff, then checked his room, but he wasn't there. Confused, I walked down to the living room, and that's when I saw the front door wide open. That immediately felt wrong. I grabbed my phone and called my roommate, asking where he was going in such a hurry and why he left the door open. He told me he hadn't even been home for the last couple of hours. That's when it hit me. I had just walked into my house while someone else was inside snooping around. I was about 6 years old, in a restroom stall at Macy's in the men's bathroom. My mom was waiting just outside. While I was sitting there, I noticed someone in the stall next to me. I could see his shoes under the divider. After a moment, the shoes disappeared. Then I heard the toilet creak, like he had stepped up onto it. My stomach dropped. A second later, I saw his hands appear over the top of the wall between the stalls, like he was about to peek over. I panicked. I yanked up my pants instantly, didn't even finish, and rushed out of the stall as fast as I could. I ran straight out of the restroom. I never told my mom what happened. But even now, I still remember how unsettling and creepy that moment felt. I was staying with my aunt while she was going through a divorce. Her kids were really young, and we got along great because I spent a lot of time playing with them. One night, after they'd overheard some arguing, the youngest asked if she could sleep in my room. I said yes, and we fell asleep together. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of heavy breathing, like a grown man trying to catch his breath. I saw a shadowy figure near the bed and felt the blanket being pulled, like someone was trying to reach the child. She had a lot of stuffed animals and pillows around her, and I was partly hidden, blending in with them. Without thinking, I kicked out as hard as I could and then jumped up, throwing punches. I knocked the person to the ground, and when I turned on the light, I realized it was my uncle's brother. The situation immediately felt even more disturbing. I grabbed the child and took her to the living room, then went back. He was acting confused, asking why I'd attacked him. The police were called, and a restraining order was put in place. My aunt didn't even know how he'd gotten into the house, but it was clear something was very wrong. Looking back, I'm just grateful I woke up when I did. It could have ended much worse. It also taught me a hard lesson. You can't automatically trust someone just because they're family. When I was little, I woke up around 3 in the morning to get a glass of water. As I walked through the house, I heard noises coming from outside the back door. It unsettled me enough that I went to wake up my mom. She came with me and opened the door, probably to show me there was nothing there. But as soon as she looked outside, she stiffened and cautiously said, "Hello." That's when I knew something really wasn't right. My dad ended up calling the police. The next morning, we found out what had happened. Someone had broken into our fenced yard during the night. They'd left several used needles behind, forced open our outdoor freezer, stolen a brand new bag of pizza rolls, and even tried to cook them in an old, broken toaster oven we hadn't thrown away yet. It was such a strange and unsettling mix of creepy and bizarre. The idea that someone had been right outside our door in the middle of the night, just casually trying to make a snack. I was 17 and working at a high-end retail store in a big shopping center. Not exactly the kind of place you expect ghost stories to happen. During the Christmas season, our shifts ran late, sometimes until 9 p.m., so by the end of the night, the store would be dark and eerily quiet. One winter evening, I was on a late shift with 2 coworkers. They were on the shop floor, and I was in the back, taking stock and putting things away. If you've ever worked in a clothing store with large stockrooms, you'll know what I mean when I say the clothes were stored in rolling racks, tall shelves on wheels that slide along tracks. Each rack has a wheel on the side to move it and a locking mechanism to keep it in place. I know I locked those shelves. I was even climbing them like a ladder to reach the top sections, which would have been impossible if they weren't locked. I climbed down to grab more stock, and then, suddenly, the lights went out. The back room has no windows, so it was pitch black. The lights were motion triggered, and sometimes they do turn off briefly, but this time, I froze. Something about that darkness felt wrong. When the lights flickered back on, all 3 shelves, the ones I knew I had locked, were rolling toward me on their tracks, completely on their own. Heavy racks that normally need a lot of force to move, now sliding straight at me. I panicked and ran out onto the shop floor, trembling. My boss noticed immediately and calmed me down enough to explain what had happened. She suggested we check the security footage. Here's the creepy part. The cameras caught the moment the lights went out, then skipped forward a full 30 to 60 seconds, the entire time the shelves were moving toward me, and resumed recording when I ran onto the shop floor. That half minute was completely unrecorded. Even just writing this down now gives me chills. This one probably isn't as intense as some stories, but it stuck with me. I was really young, so I don't remember all the details. My parents had recently hired a contractor to replace the roof on our house. Apparently, after my parents paid him, he didn't pay his workers. One of the employees showed up at our house, furious, yelling and screaming, demanding money. I remember being terrified, trying to comfort my little sister who was crying hysterically. My dad stood firm and didn't give in. After a while, the man gave up and left. We never saw him again, but I still remember how scared and helpless it felt at the time. About 5 or 6 years ago, I went to the pub with a few friends. I don't drink, so I usually volunteered to drive everyone home. It saved them a taxi fare, and they always bought me soft drinks for the night. One night, we stayed until around 1 a.m., when the pub was starting to kick people out. I dropped everyone off and was on my way home. It was about 2:30 a.m., and it normally takes me around 20 minutes to get back from the last drop-off. I was about halfway home, cruising my usual route with music playing. Everything seemed normal. Then, out of the corner of my right eye, I saw what I thought was a man running straight toward my moving car, right up to the driver's window. But as soon as he reached the glass, he vanished. Immediately, my stereo cut out, leaving me in complete silence. My hands and feet went clammy, and a sinking feeling of dread took over. I just kept driving, frozen, until I reached some traffic lights. I turned the car off and back on to get the music working again. I still can't explain what happened that night, but even now, I avoid that street whenever I can. It terrifies me to drive down it. Mine isn't too exciting, but here goes. Sorry it's long. Last January, I was eating lunch at a barbecue spot midweek. In the middle of my meal, I noticed someone staring at me. I turned and saw a man who seemed to have just materialized across the room. His smile was off, creepy, unsettling, the kind that immediately sets your nerves on edge. He asked if I lived in the area. I lied, hoping that would end it. He paused, still smiling, and then commented that he had seen me there before eating the same meal, but he liked my outfit more that previous time. I'd only been to that place twice a month, always ordering the same thing. I was freaked out, but tried to stay calm. I murmured sure and kept eating. After a minute of more staring, he left. Even though it was daylight, I was nervous enough to stay on the phone with my dad on the walk home, hyper aware of anyone nearby. I eventually convinced myself it was a one-off incident. I was wrong. A couple weeks later, leaving a bar a few blocks from my apartment, I realized someone was following me. I hadn't noticed anyone when I glanced around, but now there was a person keeping pace. I couldn't get a clear look at his face, but his pupils were unnaturally dilated. We reached a large street. He paused, tying his shoe, suspiciously long, but didn't cross. When he finally started in the opposite direction, I continued on. Almost home, there was a bridge leading to my condo's parking lot. I paused to admire the river view, then heard him. Turning, I saw him coming from the other end of the bridge. My stomach dropped. This was the same man from the barbecue. My body reacted instinctively. I started making some strange, guttural noises, like a low, panicked croak. He kept smiling. I backed slowly while moving toward the parking lot, keeping my eyes on him. The bridge was empty. No one could help me. By the time I reached the end, I had to turn my back to get into the lot. My heart was pounding. I could feel him close. I glanced over my shoulder and realized he was practically shoulder to shoulder, grinning wider than ever. He said, casually, "It was nice to see you, as always." Too scared to respond, I watched him cross the street and finally walk away. Only then did I sprint to my door and deadbolt it. I filed a police report and later learned a similar incident had occurred in the past 6 months. I was terrified, definitely being stalked. Thankfully, when COVID lockdown started in March, I left the area and my interactions with him stopped. I witnessed a kidnapping. One night, I was driving down a dark back road in the Middle East. Up ahead, I noticed a group of men struggling to lift a long, black object into the back seat of a car. At first, I assumed it was a rolled-up rug. It wasn't until I had driven past that I realized it was a woman in a burqa. By then, I was already merging onto a motorway on-ramp and couldn't turn back. I thought about calling the police, but I had no way to explain my location. No GPS, no reliable mobile service, and street signs were all in Arabic. It took me 20 minutes to get back to the spot, and by then, the car and the men were gone. The experience shook me deeply. I spent months replaying it in my head, thinking about what I could have done differently. When I was 11, my friend's dad had a severe psychological episode. He ended up standing in the middle of a parking lot in his underwear, screaming, crying, and repeatedly cutting himself with a large knife. My mom made me go inside before the police arrived. The next day, my friends and I went back and stared at the bloodstains that were still smeared across the pavement. Where I live, There's a local phenomenon called the Lindsay lights. People around here have reported strange lights appearing above the tree line near the bluffs, moving in ways that defy explanation, essentially UFOs. There's even a book written about it by a woman and her family who live in the area. It's a well-known mystery in this part of the world. One night, my boyfriend and I were driving home. We live at the very top of the bluff. I noticed a light hovering above the trees near my uncle's house, which sits in the valley between the bluffs. It was bright and completely still, but the moment I stared for a few seconds, it shot off into the distance faster than I could process. It was unnervingly fast, almost impossible. A few minutes later, once we got home, my boyfriend turned to me and asked, "Did you see that too? Or was it just me?" When I was 11, my friend and I were walking my dog around our neighborhood one night. I live in rural/suburban Illinois. Cornfields, houses, and more cornfields stretching in every direction. We were ding-dong ditching, my dog calm as always, no barking, no growling. After a long loop around the neighborhood, we ended up at the back road, a narrow street with a grassy clearing about a football field long, bordered by towering corn stalks. Everything seemed normal until we rang a house and ran into the clearing, diving to the ground. About 30 feet in, my dog froze. She was trembling, hyper-focused, the kind of intensity where you'd have to touch her eyeballs to get her to look away. I followed her gaze and saw it. At the edge of the cornfield, a figure was staring at us. Moonlight and a distant street lamp barely illuminated it, but its shape was unmistakable. My heart hammered. I thought maybe it was a person, but who stands in a cornfield at dusk? I turned to my friend. He was pale, whispering, "Do you see it too?" I nodded, my voice caught in my throat. We didn't know if it was a coyote, a bear, a person, it didn't matter. We were frozen, deciding how to escape. Slowly, we army crawled toward the street. Just as we began to run, the figure melted back into the corn. We made it home without a word. The next evening, police came knocking, asking if anyone had seen a man wanted for murdering his girlfriend and fleeing with his 2 sons. My parents denied seeing anything, but I was eavesdropping from the stairs. I took them to the clearing, pointing to exactly where I had seen the figure. My fear made me certain. 9 police cars and a dozen officers swept the field. 15 minutes in, a scream pierced the night. Officers found the missing boxer gutted. 45 minutes later, chaos erupted. Screams, shouting, commands. Then they emerged, the man in handcuffs. I was down the street, not allowed near the scene. The creepiest part? He was staring directly at me the entire time. No blink, no nod, no shift. It was as if he knew I'd pointed him out. I collapsed in my dad's arms, sobbing, feeling guilty for a crime I hadn't committed. 9 years later, I still have nightmares and night terrors. Sometimes in sleep paralysis, I see that figure coming for me. In my family, I'm the only one allowed to be legitimately afraid of cornfields. Some friends and I were camping on a family-owned piece of land in rural Northern California. They had set up a small campground with a few trailers and campers. Nothing fancy, but it saved us from pitching tents every weekend. A bamboo fence ran around the property, giving the illusion of privacy, but it wouldn't have kept anything out. That night, we hiked up to a vista above the river to smoke a joint and stare at the stars. Suddenly, from what sounded like across the river, we heard a blood-curdling scream, followed by dogs barking. It didn't take long to realize it was a mountain lion, whose scream eerily mimics a woman's scream. Look it up on YouTube. It's terrifying. We froze. A minute later, the scream came again, but this time much closer. That was our cue. It was time to get back to camp. The walk down took about 5 minutes, but it felt endless. We had no flashlights, only moonlight guiding our steps. Every few seconds, I caught glimpses of eyes reflecting in the dark. My entire back felt exposed, my instincts screaming that something could pounce at any moment. We forced ourselves to move slowly, resisting the urge to sprint. We made it back safely and took shots to calm our nerves. Maybe you had to be there, but it ranks among the top 3 scariest experiences of my life. And that's saying something, considering I've had knives and guns pulled on me before. When I was younger, my mom took me to a mall. As soon as we arrived, a mall cop walked up and stared at me in a way that immediately felt wrong. My mom quickly got me away from him. My memory is a little fuzzy since I was only 5, but I remember that later, he tried to grab me. He had been following us the whole time. My mom didn't hesitate. She decided we were leaving and went straight home. I was watching Natural Born Killers alone around 11 p.m., all the windows and doors open because it was a sweltering night in our small college town. My roommates were out at a concert. I had work and couldn't go. Suddenly, I heard a faint scurrying sound from the other side of the coffee table, between it and the TV. I sat bolt upright, paused the movie, and listened. The noise moved past me in the dark, then up the stairs toward the bedrooms. My heart raced. I hadn't seen anything, but I knew something was there. I turned on the lights, grabbed a flashlight, this was before smartphones, and started checking the house, imagining a rat, or worse, a raccoon waiting to jump out at me. I went into each bedroom, flicking on lights, peering under beds, and opening closets. Nothing. Then, under one bed, I saw them, a pair of bright yellow eyes reflecting my flashlight back at me from the far corner. My stomach dropped. I froze. It was just a tiny black kitten, as scared of me as I was of it. With a little coaxing, he finally crept out and disappeared. I sank onto the couch, heart still racing, and poured myself a huge drink. Definitely the most adrenaline-filled movie night I'd ever had. When I was about 12 years old, my family went to stay at my grandma's house. Because it was a small place, we all had to sleep on mattresses spread out across the living room floor. One night, I woke up around 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning. When I opened my eyes, I saw a tall, dark figure standing directly at the foot of my mattress. It was just looming there, staring down at me. I tried to mumble something, but then the figure suddenly raised its hands out to its sides. I have never been more terrified. I literally froze, unable to move a muscle, certain that some kind of demon had come to take me away. A moment later, the silence was broken by a loud yawn and a groan. It was just my uncle, stretching his arms before heading to the bathroom. 10 years later, we still bring that story up and laugh about it, but it's still wild to me how the body can just freeze up and leave you feeling that vulnerable. I was at the family cabin with my uncle, stepdad, and grandpa when, around 2 a.m., we heard something circling outside. It was unnervingly loud. Just one thin wooden board separated us from the night. After a few minutes, we realized it wasn't just one creature. We thought we could make out 5, though we couldn't tell if they were walking on 2 legs or 4. We huddled in the center of the cabin, rifles at the ready, waiting for dawn. The night stretched on endlessly, every creak and rustle outside setting our nerves on edge. When I was around 8 or 9, I pitched a tent in my backyard for a sleepover with my best friend. We had our flashlights out, laughing and telling stories, enjoying the night. I was sitting with my back against the side of the tent when I felt a hand touch me. I jumped up, but the hand didn't move. It stayed there for a moment. Terrified, we bolted out of the tent to see who it could be, but there was no one. Not my dad, not a neighbor, nothing. To this day, I have no idea what it was. A ghost? Something else? Some mysteries never get answers. My first job was at a gas station when I was 15. It was an old, rundown building off the beaten path in the Midwest. Leaking ceilings, dust and mold everywhere, grime caked on every surface. I worked with people who were clearly on meth, twitchy, rotten teeth, constantly stealing, and even one guy who had a manslaughter conviction. That's a story for another time. Part of my job was taking out the trash at night. Imagine the scene from SpongeBob where he takes out the trash on the graveyard shift. That was me, except it was real. The dumpster was about 50 yards from the back door, lit only by a single flickering light. Semi-trucks were parked nearby, their dark silhouettes looming. It was pitch black. One night, I'm tossing the trash in when I hear a quiet voice say, "Hey boy." I spin around, nothing but the dark outlines of trucks. I shake it off and start back to the store. Then, louder this time, "Psst, hey boy." Thinking someone might need help, I call out, "Hello? Can I help you?" "Come here," the voice hissed. Still, I see nothing. My gut screams, "Run." I start walking toward the building, then break into a jog. Suddenly, a deep, menacing shout rings out, "Hey boy." I sprint the rest of the way, lock the doors, and bolt straight to my car. I didn't stop until I was far from that place. The next morning, police tape cordoned off the gas station. Cop cars were everywhere, officers talking to my manager. Someone had broken in and robbed the place about 30 minutes after I left. When I told the police what had happened, they mentioned it matched a pattern of other gas station robberies in the area: hostages, guns, near-fatal beatings. To this day, I think about it. I can't imagine what would have happened if I hadn't trusted my gut. When I was 16, I started driving alone to my mom's house for weekend visits. One route was all highways and interstates through bigger towns. The other was a rural route through fields and small roads. On one trip, I decided to take the country route. It seemed prettier. This was in the Midwest, so picture flat farmland and long, empty stretches of road. About 2 hours into the 4-hour drive, I passed a man in a car. We made eye contact, and something about him immediately felt wrong. I tried to shrug it off, but a half hour later, after a couple of turns, I noticed he was still following me. He stayed unusually close, even though I was driving fast. After another hour of this, my nerves were shot. I didn't want to call 911 or my dad, hoping I wasn't overreacting, but I was terrified. When I saw a gas station up ahead, I pulled in, and so did he. I made a beeline for the side entrance and sprinted inside, hiding in the bathroom. Through the stall door, I peeped out and saw him wandering around the station, clearly trying to figure out where I'd gone. I stayed in that bathroom for nearly 20 minutes before finally venturing out, and he was gone. Maybe I misread the situation entirely, but at the time, I was shaking and absolutely convinced I was in danger. I was in a really bad place mentally, emotionally, and financially. One evening, I was sitting alone in the living room and said out loud, maybe everyone would be better off if I just killed myself. The moment I finished the sentence, the lamp next to me blew. Not a flicker, an actual loud pop and spark. It went completely dead and never worked again. It was probably just a coincidence, but it shook me enough to stop and rethink everything. I didn't go through with it. Went to a concert in a small mountain town in Massachusetts with some friends. We'd driven up from Philly. There was a huge rain delay, so by the time the show ended, everyone was pretty hammered. We decided to stop at a bar before calling an Uber back to our hotel about half an hour away. That's when things got weird. A few locals offered to drive us to our hotel in a van. At first it sounded helpful, but something felt off. Then one of them looked us dead in the eyes and said we weren't making it home. That was all we needed. We bolted. Panicking, we called the Uber driver who had picked us up earlier that day. Thankfully, even though he was already home in bed, he agreed to come back for us. Huge relief at first. But the drive was still unnerving. He was very much a mountain guy, and the roads were dark and winding. Then, at this creepy off-road gas station, he realized he'd forgotten to put his gas cap back on. We had to pull over in the pitch black to look for it. It turned into one of those nights where everyone in the group dropped their location pins in the chat, just in case our friends back home needed to find us. I still have nightmares about it. I was being followed for what felt like half an hour, maybe an hour. I honestly can't remember. I was too scared. It was a security guard from the grocery store I'd just left. He'd left work and was following me as I walked home. I didn't stop. I kept moving, taking random turns until, finally, I found a taxi and got home safely. It had only been a couple of blocks from my place, but after that, I never walked that route again. I went out to a bar with my brother-in-law at the time. I was sober. When we left and got to my car, a guy approached us, asking if I had a cigarette or a lighter. As I turned to respond, a white van pulled up behind my car. Another man jumped out and opened the sliding door. I told the first guy I didn't have anything, and he stepped closer. The man with the van grabbed a baseball bat from the back. Both of them started approaching me, and all I could think to do was take off one of my stilettos. I held it up and said, "You can have this. Either I stab you with this end or I kick you with the other." He backed off. They jumped in the van and drove away. I've never been that scared in my life. From that night on, I always carry a knife and mace. Meanwhile, my brother-in-law got in my car and just sat there, watching. He didn't think to call the police or even yell for help. That guy had been in the bar and left just a moment before us. Who knows if he'd been watching all night? I dodged something truly crazy that night. When I was in middle school, a classmate I barely knew added me on MySpace. At first, I responded to his messages just to be polite, but soon they became disturbing. He started talking about torturing people and sharing obsessive, morbid facts about the Holocaust. I tried to ignore him, but he was relentless. Every time I blocked him, he'd create another account and start messaging again. One day, I got called into the office at school and was met by several officers. A girl's mom had been checking her daughter's social media and discovered messages from him. He had written that he planned to fight my boyfriend, and if I still refused to date him, he threatened to kill me. Thankfully, her mom contacted the authorities and the school. While no legal action was taken, the school was instructed to keep him completely separate from me. Despite that, the next semester, he ended up in a class I was a TA for. The school didn't move him, claiming all the other classes were too full. For the next 2 years, I spent my time blocking the endless fake accounts he made in attempts to contact me. It was a terrifying, exhausting period, and it left a lasting impact on me. I worked security for a small, startup company that monitored heavy levee equipment out in the orchards. No radio. No gun. No mace. No flashlight. No phone service. I was strictly there to monitor and take notes, but if anything happened, help was at least 30 to 45 minutes away. After a few weeks of night shifts, I'd gotten comfortable with my location. One road in, one road out, orchards for miles. It was about 2:30 a.m. when I heard an alarm going off somewhere in the darkness. My position was along the levee like this, O+O, with my car as the O on the right, the levee as the plus, and the alarm somewhere at the O on the left. I drove over the levee toward a portable office container where the alarm sounded, high beams cutting dim lines through the orchards. That's when I saw it, a dark figure, a few rows back, vanish behind a tree. I stopped, staring into the murky orchard, heart pounding. Nothing moved, but the alarm kept ringing. I got out, using my phone as a flashlight, and discovered the source, a tiny white battery-powered alarm clock sitting on a plastic table. My brain screamed at me to get back in the car. I popped the batteries out. Silence returned, but only briefly. As I reversed, my headlights swept the trees again. The same dark shape was now 3 or 4 rows closer, crouching behind a tree. My gut screamed, what if there's more? This is just a distraction. I climbed back onto the levee and spent the next 3.5 hours alone. The silence of the winter orchard was suffocating. No insects, no wildlife, just me and my pounding heart. I almost wanted something to leap out, to confirm my fears, but nothing came. When the morning shift finally arrived, sipping his coffee, the sun creeping over the horizon, we walked back to the spot. That's when he spotted them, massive boot prints, pacing back and forth along one row of trees, stopping abruptly a few rows from the office container. No forward, no backward, no vehicle tracks. Whoever, or whatever, had been there had appeared, walked in a line for hours, and vanished. We reported it to the boss. He shrugged it off as a prank by the construction crew, but that night stayed with me. After that, I didn't last much longer in security. That shift made me a believer in the unexplainable. My creepiest experience was paranormal, and yes, it definitely counts. It all started when my boyfriend's dad gave him a World War II Nazi helmet. You can probably imagine the kind of bad energy it carried. From the moment it entered our home, the atmosphere shifted. Over the time we had it, both my boyfriend and I were punched, scratched, pushed, and even had our hair pulled. One night, I woke up to 3 loud bangs on our stairs, like someone had hammered them. The next morning, our neighbor confirmed they had heard it too. On another night, we were woken by loud scratching on our bedroom door. The marks were still visible in the daylight. One afternoon, I saw an entity in the house. It had pale skin, a gaping void where its mouth should have been, and black holes for eyes. The sense of dread was overwhelming. Both my boyfriend and I felt drained every day. We'd go to bed early and still wake up exhausted. My boyfriend, normally lighthearted and quick with a joke, became tense, serious, and sometimes frighteningly snappy. My brother was staying with us, but after the second night, he left and has never told us what he saw. I suspect he witnessed what I did and didn't want to scare me. Eventually, my boyfriend connected the strange happenings to the helmet and decided to sell it, warning the buyer about it, of course. Once it was gone, the energy in our home returned to normal. Those few weeks had been terrifying. Interestingly, my boyfriend's dad had experienced odd things while he owned the helmet, but thought it might be his imagination. He never told my boyfriend, so there was no suggestion influencing us. We were completely unaware that anything was attached to it. This one still freaks me out, even 11 years later. A new girl moved to our school, but no one seemed to talk to her, not even the teachers. I only had one class with her, so I decided to reach out. I talked to her for half a semester, letting her copy my homework and sharing my notes. But she started saying things that made my skin crawl. She told me she had little dragons, only she could see, and they would tell her to do bad things to people. I didn't know what to make of it and became wary of her. Then, one day, she just stopped coming to class. Curious, I asked my classmates if they knew what happened. No one had ever heard of her. I even asked our science teacher if she'd moved, but the teacher looked at me like I had 3 heads. The seating chart didn't show her name either. To this day, I have no idea what happened. I've tried looking her up online, with no luck. I can't shake the thought, was I talking to a ghost? It's a memory that still unsettles me to this day. I'm a woman who lives alone, and last year I realized I'd been getting stalked for some time without even noticing it first. I kept seeing the same guy at the shops every time I went out, always making sure I noticed him. At first, I brushed it off. Small town, same people, nothing unusual. But it escalated. I started receiving creepy calls asking how my day was, and comments about what I was wearing, details only someone following me would know. Eventually, I understood. I was being stalked. The police tried to intervene, but it didn't stop. One night, I woke up to my dogs going crazy. I opened my eyes to see a torchlight moving inside the house, growing brighter as it got closer. The man had gotten inside and was standing at my door, telling me how pretty I looked that day. I grabbed the machete I kept in the cupboard next to my bed and told him to leave, or I would use it. He bolted. I called the police, and they arrested him. I ended up getting an IVO against him. During the investigation, I found out he had targeted another woman. He had raped her. It was terrifying, and it completely changed how I feel about safety in my own home. One night, after a big argument with my mom, I ran away into the pouring rain. As I walked, I met a little boy around my age. We talked as we walked together for a while. Then, suddenly, he stopped at the edge of the road, waved at me, and the wind and rain seemed to pick up, and just as quickly, it calmed. In less than 5 seconds, he was gone. Shaken, I ran straight back home. I haven't even thought about running away since. My friends wanted to try an escape room. We'd done a few before and had fun, so we signed up, 4 women and me, the lone guy. During the introduction, the host said something strange. Do not touch Adam, our actor, who will be joining your experience. You can interact with him as your guide, but no touching Adam. I asked for clarification. Why would anyone touch him? She explained that some groups, usually drinking, had harassed or even assaulted him. My jaw dropped. That made the warning make perfect sense. We walked down to the entrance and started. Adam appeared and began his part, giving the backstory. Almost instantly, the hair on the back of my neck and arms stood up. Something about him was off. I had to fight the urge to stop everything, get my group out, and leave immediately. I didn't participate in the escape puzzles at all. I was watching Adam the entire time, trying to figure out why he felt so unnerving. Despite my instincts screaming to turn around, we progressed further into the building, through more locked doors separating us from the exit. When it was over and we left, my friends asked what was wrong. I told them I'd never been so unsettled by someone in my life, and that under any other circumstance, I would have trusted my gut and walked out. Suddenly, the warning about Adam made total sense. Afterwards, the women told me something interesting. Apparently, men trigger that same intense response in them far more frequently than I realized. Adam was definitely off, but in the controlled setting of the escape room, it was manageable, barely. A few months ago, I was getting off a Discord call when I thought I heard footsteps above my room. At first, I tried to shrug it off, assuming it was nothing, but then they got louder. My friend on the call asked what the noise was, and I whispered that I thought it might be footsteps in my attic or on the roof. I went and got my mom, and by the time we checked, the sounds had stopped. I haven't heard them since, but it was unnerving as hell, like someone or something was moving just out of sight above me. One of two experiences that still haunt me. In my early 20s, I visited Auschwitz with a close friend who had been imprisoned there in 1944 to 45 and lost his entire immediate family. He guided me through the camp, sharing his memories. It's impossible to capture the depth of that experience in just a few paragraphs. It was beyond anything I had ever imagined. The second experience was far more mysterious. I once house sat a rather large home in central London for several months. The house was completely empty except for a couple of grumpy, non-communicative cats. The nearest neighboring house was about 200 feet away, with a tall stone wall around it. I often sat on the balcony or roof, watching the sunset and the city skyline, smoking, not weed. One night, around midnight, I heard singing, a young girl, maybe 12 or 13, on or near the roof. I think it was Dutch. The sound seemed to move around the roof and loft, just out of reach. Spooked, I searched the entire loft, the accessible roof, and the two lower floors, but couldn't find the source. The volume of the singing seemed to change depending on where I stood. It stopped and started multiple times, and it did not sound like a recording. To my knowledge, I'm not crazy. No one was playing a prank, and I've never heard anything like it since. Even the homeowners had no explanation. Thinking about it still gives me goosebumps. I've shared a bit about our trip to Caucasia before, but here's another story. For context, Caucasia is a republic in Russia, mostly covered in forests, mountains, and home to plenty of wild animals. Our family was driving to my grandmother's, which meant a long journey with plenty of stops. At one of them, everyone ran off to the crumbling public toilet, leaving us kids curious and free to explore. We noticed a rocky cliff nearby that looked perfect for photos. As I climbed down, something crunched under my feet. The sound was strange, unnatural. I looked closer. Bones. Deer, hares, and human remains scattered across the base of the cliff. My stomach dropped. Looking around, we realized that just a few meters away was a cave, probably a wolf den. Then we heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate. Without thinking, we sprinted back to the car, hearts hammering, desperate not to become part of that grim collection. This happened when I was about 14. I was walking through my town to the gas station to grab some snacks. As I passed a guy sitting on the side of the road, nothing seemed suspicious, so I kept moving. But as soon as I was about a yard past him, he got up and started following me. I quickened my pace. So did he. I started running. I'm not athletic, so I was slow, but he sounded big, heavy, muscular, fast. My heart was pounding as I sprinted with everything I had. Finally, I reached the main road, where there were cars and people. I kept running along the sidewalk, and he was gone. By the time I got my snacks and a ride home, I was still shaking. Maybe he was just messing with me, trying to scare someone. But seriously, don't ever do that. It's terrifying. A friend of mine told me this story from his time in the Vietnam War. During a fierce jungle skirmish, bullets were flying everywhere around him and his squad. It was, by his account, the most terrifying hour of his life. Then suddenly, the enemy retreated and the gunfire stopped. Just as they were catching their breath, over a hill came an elderly Vietnamese woman pushing a wheelbarrow full of ice-cold cans of Budweiser. She shouted, $1, $1, and sold them all. So there they were, soldiers who had just survived a life-or-death firefight, standing in the jungle, cracking open beers. He said it blew his mind that minutes ago they could have been killed, and now here's this woman, calmly offering cold beer like nothing happened. A few years ago, I bartended at a historic hotel built on the site of an old battlefield. One late weeknight, I had only one guest left at the bar. We were chatting as he finished his drink, and I was telling him about the hotel's quirky features: non-functioning bank vaults on some floors, the original water pump in the basement, that sort of thing. Then, out of nowhere, the back of my shirt was yanked so hard that the top button nearly hit my chin. Thinking it was one of the valets playing a prank, I spun around, only to find no one there. The guest at the bar jumped back, knocking over his stool. "What the hell was that? No one's there, and your shirt just moved," he shouted. I'd never had to calm a grown man down like that, but I forced myself into customer service mode. I laughed it off nervously and joked that maybe it was one of the resident soldier ghosts, upset that I was revealing the hotel secrets. I ended up walking him to his room and called a valet to keep me company while I shut down the bar in record time. The next day, I found out the guest had come downstairs at 3 a.m., demanding to check out. He swore he'd woken up to his curtains wide open and the clock radio blaring, even though he'd closed it all before bed. The hotel was full of creepy incidents, but that's the one that actually got to me. Back in the 80s, I dated a girl who could heal my headaches in the strangest way. She'd place her hand on the back of my neck and quietly recite a verse from some modern witch's book of remedies, or something like that. It worked. Every single time. I was completely freaked out, but also kind of amazed. I was about 14 when my dad went away on a 2-week business trip, leaving me to run the farm by myself. It was mostly just feeding the horses and chickens, not a huge deal. The farm was way out of town, down a long dirt road. The nearest neighbors were 2 pastures away, and my dad had a strict rule: never lock the doors. After the first few nights, I started hearing tapping on the windows late at night. Against my dad's rules, I began locking the front and back doors. Then the tapping moved to doorknob rattling. And then things got truly strange. One morning, I found the horses raiding the hay storage stall. The latch was stiff and tricky. There was no way the horses could have opened it themselves. The worst morning, though, I stepped out on the back porch and saw all the chickens lined up along the side of the shed, evenly spaced, with their necks broken. A few were still twitching. The chicken yard latch had clearly been opened and left that way by a person. It was like they'd been put on display. When my dad finally came home, he did something worse than being scared. He blamed me. He insisted the horses had opened the hay stall and that the dogs were responsible for the open chicken yard and the perfectly lined, broken-necked chickens. Looking back, our next-door neighbor was infamous for being completely unhinged. He'd been known to set bear traps in his haystack to catch kids who wandered in and block a neighbor's driveway with dirt as revenge. My guess? He knew my dad was gone, could hear my music across the pastures, and decided that terrorizing a middle school girl alone on the farm for a couple of weeks would be hilarious. I was about 13, sitting in my room in the front corner of the house, when I suddenly heard an earth-shaking crash outside. I didn't live on a busy street at all, so it was immediately terrifying. I ran outside to see chaos. My neighbor, 2 houses down, had driven straight through his garage, halfway out the back. Cops, fire trucks, ambulances, it looked like a disaster zone. It turned out he had been trying to hit his house, not the garage, in a failed suicide attempt. 2 months later, he tried again, this time attempting to hang himself, but fell before completing it. Finally, after leaving a mental facility, he managed to end his life with a shotgun in broad daylight, just as we all got off the bus from school. It was terrifying and utterly surreal to witness how close it had come, not just once, but multiple times. I must have been about 4 years old, out in a department store with my mom and aunt. I needed to use the bathroom, so my aunt took me into the women's restroom, which had a few stalls. She opened one of the stall doors, and there was a woman lying on the floor, face up. Blood was coming from her mouth, pooling beneath her head as if she'd been there for some time. Her head was near the door, her feet toward the toilet. She seemed conscious because when my aunt opened the door, her eyes immediately went to my aunt. There was no expression, no attempt to speak or move, only her eyes shifting from my aunt to meet mine. My aunt grabbed my hand and hurried me out of the bathroom, rushing to find an employee and explain what we had seen. I still remember that woman's face vividly, even now. I never found out what happened to her that day, but the memory has stayed with me for years. I, 27M, was driving home from college one night, a 20 to 30-minute drive, nothing unusual. I decided to take a new route I'd used a few times during the day. It led through a residential neighborhood before opening onto a highway. As I drove through the neighborhood, I noticed a car behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it, but soon it became clear they were following very closely, almost tailgating, and taking the same turns I was. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they knew the area better than I did and were just heading the same way. But then paranoia set in. I started making short stops, changing my speed, trying to shake them. Every move I made, they mirrored. Every turn, every acceleration, every signal. That's when I called home, telling my parents I was fairly certain I was being followed, and kept them on the line as I drove. Finally, I reached the highway and spotted a chance, a right turn on red. I took it. Luckily, a semi was approaching, positioned perfectly so I could slip in front of it while the following car couldn't. It worked. I made it home safely that night, but I've never taken that route again. When I was around 14 or 15, I was walking home through a rundown part of town. Out of nowhere, a white van pulled up just ahead of me. It slowed as it passed, and the back door swung open. A man leaned out, whistling and staring at me in a way that immediately set off alarms in my gut. I felt pure danger, a wave of instinctive fear, and bolted down a side street in the opposite direction. I have no idea what happened to the van or where it went. That moment still sticks with me. It felt like they were kidnappers, and it was one of the creepiest experiences of my life. I was traveling with my family through Caucasia, a republic in Russia mostly covered by wild forests, mountains, and rivers. We decided to drive to my grandmother's instead of taking the train, but ended up getting lost. It was around 3 a.m., and my stepfather misread our paper map, turning off the highway into a completely empty field. We drove for about 20 minutes into the void. No houses, no gas stations, not a single soul in sight. Then, out of nowhere, a terrifying old woman appeared, flying straight into the road. We were frozen with fear, but my stepfather cautiously drove closer to ask for directions. She couldn't speak, just screamed aggressively and hurled herself at the car. Panicked, my stepfather tried to drive away, but suddenly the rear window shattered. He jumped out to confront the woman, and she was gone. There was nothing around but endless fields. She had vanished into thin air, and it was impossible to imagine how. When I was about 10 or 11, I went trick-or-treating with 3 friends without our parents. It was getting late, around 11 p.m., and most houses were dark. As we walked, we noticed a random man following us. At first, we thought he was just heading home too, but we had a fairly winding 20-minute route back to my friend's house, and he stayed behind us the entire way. By the time we were about a block from the house, something clicked. We all knew we were in danger. Without saying a word, we bolted. I didn't dare look back, so I don't know if he chased us, but we made it safely. Once inside, we immediately told my friend's mom, and my parents came to pick me up. It was terrifying, and I've never forgotten how quickly that fear took over. I went to my mom's friend's house with her. Her friend's boyfriend had 2 kids, a boy and a girl. The boy was only about 7, but something about him immediately sent shivers down my spine. At one point, he asked to see my hand. I hesitated, but held it out. Without warning, he twisted my thumb, bent it backward, then yanked it sharply. I pulled my hand back, startled and in pain. "Ow, why'd you do that?" I asked. He looked at me with a blank, monotone stare and said, "I wanted to know what it felt like to break someone's thumb." Later that day, he casually mentioned that he wanted to put nails in his Nerf bullets so he could shoot people. He said he wanted to inflict pain on people without killing them. Even as a kid, the sheer lack of remorse or fear in him was terrifying. I have a really strange one. My family is from a remote village in northern Portugal, and we usually visit every summer to enjoy the rivers and lakes. Last year, my grandma and I were exploring along the river, wandering into areas we hadn't seen before. There was a small walkway that led into the woods. I needed to take a leak, and, being curious, I decided to check it out while my grandma stayed a little behind. As I scanned the area for a spot, my eyes landed on something odd, a pink figure partially hidden behind a bush. At first, I thought it was just a scarecrow and tried to calm myself. But after a few seconds, I noticed subtle movement, and my heart sank. Something about it didn't feel right. I immediately ran back to my grandma to tell her. It took a minute or 2 to get back, and when we looked, there was nothing behind the bush, so it wasn't a scarecrow. Terrified, I decided to approach the bush to see for myself. That's when I heard my grandma calling me. I looked, and there it was, a person in a pink dress, covering their face with their hands and some cloth, slowly walking from behind the bush toward a house in the distance. My grandma's eyes were wide, her mouth agape. Neither of us had ever seen anything like it. We watched as the figure disappeared inside the house. We later asked friends who lived nearby about the house. They said it was rented, and new people came every so often. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that it was some kind of predator lying in wait. Since then, we've been much more cautious when exploring remote areas, especially with children. When I was about 7 or 8, I was walking down a fairly busy street in Colchester with my mom and little brother coming back from shopping. Out of nowhere, an old man, wearing nothing but a long coat and shoes, stopped me and asked about a very specific address. Being innocent and clueless, I tried to tell him I didn't know, but before I could speak, my mom grabbed my hand, told me not to look at him, and started walking faster. It wasn't until we reached the car that she explained what had happened. That man was a pedophile, and he was trying to lure me away, a common trick they used. At the time, I didn't fully understand how terrifying it was. Thinking back now, though, it's still chilling to realize there are people out there who do things like that. After high school, I worked third shift as a CNA in an assisted living facility. The call lights, there weren't electronic. They were the old school kind with a string you had to pull down manually. They were easy enough to use, but not so easy that they'd go off by accident. At first, nothing unusual happened. Then one night, one of our residents passed away. The room was empty and locked, so imagine my surprise when the call light went off. I had to take the keys and enter the darkened room, and when I got inside, the call light in the bathroom had been pulled down. A second time, the same thing happened in a vacant room on the second floor. This time, I made another equally terrified CNA come with me. The third time was the creepiest. It happened in an occupied suite just a few doors from the nurse's station. I answered the call light fast, less than 30 seconds after it went off, because the resident in that room almost never used her buttons. This particular button was installed upside down, so you had to push it up to trigger it. The woman used a walker and wasn't exactly speedy, so I was completely thrown when I opened the door and found her asleep in her chair in the other room, in front of the TV. When I told the nurse on duty, she just shrugged. She said there were periods where it happened frequently and times when it never did. She was right. The lights never went off again after that. I have a few other stories from that job, but none as unsettling as that one. I used to live in a 3-story townhouse. The first floor was the entry and family room. The second floor had my office, kitchen, and living area, and the third floor held the bedrooms. My bedroom was directly above my office. Every so often, while sitting in my office, I'd hear what sounded like a marble dropping onto the tile above me in my room, rolling across the floor for a few feet before stopping. On other occasions, when I was in my bedroom, I'd get this intense feeling that I wasn't alone. Sometimes it got so unsettling that I'd end up crashing on the couch downstairs just to escape the oppressive vibe in my own room. That was about a year ago, the last time it really happened. What made it even stranger was that I had friends over once, and they heard the noise too. It was comforting, in a way, to know I wasn't just losing my marbles. This happened when I was a baby, and my parents were visiting Toronto as tourists. My mom had me in a stroller on the TTC when an elderly woman started staring at me, muttering and cursing under her breath. My mom, feeling an intense unease, glared back and immediately got off the train. Almost instantly, my temperature skyrocketed, and I began vomiting uncontrollably. My mom was seriously considering rushing me to the hospital. By the next morning, though, I was completely fine, as if nothing had happened. The strange aftermath? The amethyst ring my mom had been wearing that day was now completely cracked from the inside. It was a chilling, inexplicable experience that stayed with us ever since. I was waiting at a bus stop around midnight after work, in a part of town that's, let's just say, not the safest. A group of indigenous men showed up and started talking among themselves. At first, I didn't pay much attention, but then one of them called out, "Ain't that right, white boy?" and asked if it bothered me. I just shrugged and said no. Then they asked what I thought of native people in general. I said, "Same as anyone. We're all human." The biggest guy in the group, easily 6 feet 4 inches and 300 pounds, leaned in and said, "No, man, I'm not human." My heart was pounding, but I forced a smile and said, "Well, I guess you must be superhuman then." They all laughed, the tension evaporated, and the big guy said, "You're the chillest white boy I ever met." Those few moments before that, I was sure I was about to get robbed or beaten. They had gang colors, and their demeanor screamed trouble, probably not sober either. But staying calm, genuine, and a little quick on my wit, that made all the difference. Sometimes that's all it takes. I was working at DWI task force on a late, hot, dark Arkansas evening. I stopped the car and walked up to interview the driver. Nothing about him screamed intoxication, but something about him just gave me the creeps. His girlfriend in the passenger seat? Completely normal. I returned to my cruiser to run his history and write a citation. Back then, everything ran over the radio, so getting the info was taking longer than usual. The driver got impatient. He started waving his arms, shouting, "Is everything okay?" Then, without warning, he stepped out of the car. He walked straight toward my cruiser, pressed his face up to the driver's side window, calling my name, looking for me. Only, I wasn't in the driver's seat. The uneasy vibe I'd gotten from him made me stand at the passenger side rear corner of my cruiser instead, pistol at the ready. He had no idea I was there, just feet away, on the other side of the flashing lights. Eventually, he returned to his vehicle. I finished the citation and walked back to him. He looked amazed. "Where were you, man?" he asked. "At the police car," I said. "No way. I checked. You weren't there. I saw you come back." "I was there," I replied calmly. He shook his head. "No way." I told him, "Next time, don't approach a police car like that. It's dangerous. You could have been hurt." We wrapped up the citation and he drove off. To this day, I still don't know what it was about him that triggered such a creepy feeling, but I imagine he's telling someone. I swear, man, the cop wasn't there. Then he was at my car. And his girlfriend? Probably thinking, 1. How are we alive? 2. I can't believe this guy. When I was 13 or 14, my friends and I were walking to a friend's house in a quiet, affluent suburb in Minnesota. We walked and biked around on our own all the time, so we felt safe. Out of nowhere, an older guy on a bike rode up, got off, lifted my friend's skirt, and rode away without saying a word. We were frozen in shock, not knowing what to do. We called the police, but they told us that since he hadn't physically touched her, there was nothing they could do, even if they found him. My friend was wearing shorts under her skirt, but the violation of her privacy has stayed with me ever since. It was the first time I truly felt, as a girl, I'm less safe in this world. About 10 years ago, I moved to a new state and rented a room in a shared house. I didn't realize at the time that it was in a rough part of town. I was a university student and didn't think much of it. One night, I was walking to the train station to meet some friends when I noticed two guys starting to follow me. At first, I thought maybe they were just going the same way, but something about them felt off. My gut told me I wasn't safe. When I got to the station, they were just standing a few feet away, staring at me. I boarded the train, only for them to get on the same carriage. I moved from car to car, and they followed me every time. Finally, the train stopped at a busy station. I stepped outside, hoping for some safety in the crowd. The two guys got off too, lingering nearby. My heart was pounding. Just as the train doors were about to close, I bolted back inside, and the doors snapped shut behind me. I watched from the window as they tried to get back on, failing, and they gave me angry, murderous stares as the train pulled away. It was one of the scariest stalking experiences of my life. I worked at a nursing home, so ghosts were practically part of the job. I have a lot of stories, but here are a few of the creepiest. One night, we were sitting around listening to a radio and chatting. I asked a coworker a question, and just as they were about to answer, the radio suddenly switched to a different frequency. Through the static, we could hear a scrambled sentence, almost like something or someone was answering me. Another time, I was in the storeroom doing inventory. We had these industrial-sized cans of peas, super heavy. I put one carefully on a shelf, turned to grab another, and suddenly the whole can flew to the floor. I knew who was responsible and said, "You're just mad you're dead." Later, when I went to the freezer to stock supplies, I put some things away, stepped out, came back, and caught a shadowy figure staring at me from the back of the freezer before fading away. One of the creepiest experiences happened near the end of my shift. Me and the same guy from the radio story were getting ready to clock out. We were joking around when we suddenly heard someone screaming, "Help! Help!" It sounded like it came from the dining room a few doors down. We ran over, but there was no one there. We checked the hall, empty. It was the dead of night, and the whole wing was ours. I have a few creepy experiences, but two really stand out. The first happened the first time I stayed at my now ex-boyfriend's place. He was into bondage and had tied me up and blindfolded me. He left the room to get some fruit for what he called sensory training. While he was gone, I suddenly sensed someone else in the room. I felt warm breath on me and thought, at first, that he was just trying to be sexy. I called out, "Babe, can I have something to drink?" But there was no response. Instead, a low, harsh whisper said my name. I froze. I couldn't move or see anything, but my heart was pounding. About 10 long seconds later, I heard the door open, and I panicked, shouting, "Untie me right now." He came in, acting apologetic, and untied me. I was frantic, telling him someone had said my name. Calmly, he explained that his apartment was haunted, that this had happened before, and only to female visitors. He lived on Japanese temple grounds that used to be a cemetery. I noped out of there fast. Even though we were together for 5 years, after a handful of similar experiences, I asked him to move in with me. I couldn't handle staying there anymore. The second experience wasn't paranormal, but it was still deeply unsettling. I used to go fishing at a pier where local law allows fishing 24/7. There was an older man who always fished in the same spot, never talking to anyone. One weekend, my cousin and I went out around 11 p.m. The man was there, sitting on his beach chair with his cooler next to him and his dog by his side. He wore sunglasses the entire time. From 11 p.m. until around 6 a.m., he never got up, not to eat, not to pee. We assumed he was just tired or didn't need anything. The next time we went, 3 days later, he was in the exact same spot. The dog was still there too. There was a strange smell, but we didn't think much of it at first. A few days later, my uncle called to tell me they'd found a dead fisherman at the pier. He asked if we had seen a man with a dog in a Toyota truck, and my stomach dropped. The guy we'd been seeing for days was actually dead, and had been for over a week. The smell we noticed was his body beginning to bloat. Apparently, the only reason anyone realized he had died was because his dog stole someone's fish, which led that person to discover the corpse. Ever since, I can't bring myself to fish at that pier. I'm not sure if this really counts, but it definitely unnerved me. I've shared parts of this before, but here's the full story. When I was 8, I almost drifted out into the Chesapeake Bay. I got caught in a riptide and had no idea what was happening. I kept swimming straight, thinking I was fine, and by sheer luck, a family friend jumped in and saved me. I was already pretty far from shore, and if I hadn't been rescued, I likely would have grown exhausted trying to swim back. The scary part is, I didn't even panic. I didn't know anything was wrong, which is why I never tried to swim parallel to the shore like you're supposed to. Thinking back, it's honestly terrifying how close I came to disaster. One evening, I was sitting at a crowded bus stop, absorbed in a book, when a rough-looking older man shuffled up to stand beside me. He wore a worn leather cowboy hat and carried a massive, overstuffed canvas backpack. I could feel his gaze on me, but I'm a city girl. This kind of attention usually doesn't faze me. After a few minutes, he asked, "So, what's a pretty girl like you doing out by herself at night?" "Just trying to get home from work," I said flatly, not looking at him. He paused, then leaned a little closer. "What you reading?" "A book," I replied. "Not much of a talker, huh?" This time I turned to glare at him. "Not with strangers, no." He chuckled low. "You know what, Missy? Watching you here these past few minutes, I've taken a liking to you." Suddenly, he stepped closer. His bright blue eyes locked on mine, piercing and unblinking. "And because I like you, I'm going to tell you something very, very bad is about to happen. If you're smart, you'll leave. Right now." He leaned back against the railing and smiled, but his eyes stayed cold. "Don't walk. Run." I didn't start running until I was out of his sight. Letting him see me flee would have felt like letting him win, and I wasn't about to do that. When I was 17, I worked at a Jack in the Box. There was this guy who used to come in regularly, spiky bracelets, a Slayer shirt, the whole edgy vibe. At first, he seemed cool enough, but something about him just didn't sit right. He kept talking about how he had just gotten out of prison. When I asked what for, he kept dodging the question, finally blurting out something like manslaughter, or at least, that's what he claimed. One of my breaks, we ended up smoking a joint together, and then he asked if I wanted to come over to his place. I didn't even hesitate, noped out of that one immediately. One night, I was at my granny's house with my 2 cousins, K and O, and my sister, C. Granny had gone to bed, and the 4 of us were talking in the living room. Being the oldest, I was in charge. As we were getting ready for bed, I heard a knock at the front door. I told everyone to stay put while I went to check. Peering through the window, I saw nothing. No one. I shrugged it off and went back, telling them it was probably some kids playing a prank. Later that night, while everyone else was asleep, I was still lying awake when I heard a sound outside. Kay woke up and whispered, asking what it was. I told her I'd check, and I crept to the nearest window. Again, nothing. Then knock. This time, right at the window. Kay's voice trembled. What was that? I promised I'd look again, and when I did, I froze. Staring back at me was a face I'll never forget. Pale skin, hollow dark eyes, and an expressionless mouth. Just staring. My heart leapt, and I made that weird gasping sound you do when you're terrified but can't scream. I told Kay to get under the blankets and hide. She did, shaking. When I looked again, it was gone. Even now, years later, Kay and I still remember that night vividly. O and C slept through the whole thing, but for me, the nightmares lasted a month. I'm diagnosed with schizophrenia, but this happened before I had any diagnosis. At the time, I was living in a friend's basement in a small room. Everything felt normal at first, but after a while I began sensing what I can only describe as an evil presence, something like a dementor, but without any real form. I tried to ignore it until one night when I felt like I was visited by 3 or 4 of these shadowy shapes. I say 3 or 4 because one seemed to exist in 2 places at once, both just outside my left field of vision and also in front of me to the right. It didn't make sense, but it felt real. I also felt what I can only describe as the idea of bullets and knives. It was like invisible projectiles were hitting me, like knives were being pushed into my back, not physically, but mentally. At the time, I was lying flat on my mattress, meditating, trying to relax. Then everything went black for a moment. Suddenly, I was awake again. Same room, but darker, and those figures were there. They didn't move, if you could even call it standing, but I was completely paralyzed. Oddly, I felt calm, almost detached, even though I had no control at all. The vividness of it stuck with me. Later, while still living in that room, I had another experience. A different figure, one I somehow understood to be me, appeared at the doorway. It wore a hooded cloak, completely void of color, yet somehow more real than anything else. When it leaned forward, all I saw was a crystalline skull glowing with deep, shifting colors. I don't really try to rationalize it anymore. It still creeps me out, just not as much as it used to. Maybe I've just gotten desensitized to it over time. When my daughter was around 2 or 3, we used to go to a soft play center. It had the usual climbing frames, tunnels, and ball pits. Because she has autism, we went early in the morning when it was quiet. Too much noise would overwhelm her. That particular morning, there were hardly any other kids around. She loved climbing, and her favorite thing was making it all the way to the top and exploring the tunnels. That day, she insisted I come with her, so I climbed up to the very top to see her favorite spot. That's when I saw him. Sitting right in the middle of the tunnel was a man in his 40s. I asked why he was there, and he muttered something about waiting for his child. Then he left, saying he was going to look for his kid, but I hadn't seen any other children around, except for a few tiny ones far below. About a minute later, I glanced down and saw him walking out of the building, completely alone, without a child in sight. When I reported it to the staff, they didn't seem concerned. I called the non-urgent police line to give them a description, but we never returned to that soft play again. A friend of mine once got into a car accident in rural North Dakota, back before carrying cell phones was common. His passenger was injured, and he had a deep cut on his head that was bleeding heavily. With no way to call for help, he walked to the nearest farmhouse. No one was home, but the door was unlocked, so he went inside, grabbed a towel to press against his wound, and called 911. In the rush, he left the towel behind and unknowingly tracked blood through parts of the house. He said he would have cleaned it up, but he was more worried about getting help for his friend. I can only imagine how terrifying it would be to come home and find a trail of blood leading through your house. You'd probably assume something awful had happened. Still, it was an emergency, and in a situation like that, it's definitely better safe than sorry. My brother was in the public library bathroom one day, sitting in a stall, and, like many people do, he brought a book along to read. He had it resting on the floor while he was just minding his own business. Out of the corner of his eye, he suddenly noticed something moving. Then a guy's face appeared from underneath the stall divider, wide-eyed and staring straight at him. My brother didn't hesitate. He yanked up his pants, and since the guy was already in a bad position, he kicked him square in the face. Then he got out of there as fast as he could, leaving the bathroom and the situation behind. I was walking home from work, completely exhausted, when I noticed a boy standing under an overpass. I had to pass by him to get home, and as I got closer, I realized how thin and young he looked, maybe 14 or 15 at most. It took me a moment to connect the dots. Skinny, probably hungry, I should offer him food. All I have at home is ramen, maybe I can offer him some. By the time I figured this out, I'd already walked past him, so I turned back and said, "If you're hungry, all I've got is ramen. You can have some. I live just a few blocks from here." At the mention of food, the boy's face lit up, and he started following me for about half a block. Then, out of nowhere, a couple of middle-aged adults came running up. "Where are you going? We can't know you're safe if we don't know where you're going. We still have your stuff. Come back with us so we can keep you safe." I froze for a second, unsure what to do, but the boy seemed to know them. He followed them back to that shadowy area under the overpass, and I kept my distance, watching cautiously as I slowly walked home, trying to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. Then, a huge SUV pulled up, driven by a well-dressed older woman. She spoke with the boy and the adults for just a moment, and the boy got into her car, and they drove off. That poor kid. He looked so hungry, so scared. Almost 2 decades later, I still wonder if he's okay. I was staying with a buddy in rural Minnesota during a summer break from college. One bright, sunny afternoon, I was lying on the living room couch reading while my friend and his family were all out at work. Suddenly, I heard music. I sat up, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It was clearly music, and it sounded close, but the house was isolated, out in the country with no neighbors nearby. Then I noticed movement in a sunbeam. Dust motes were swirling strangely, almost coming together, and they began to form the shape of a little girl. The feeling that washed over me wasn't curiosity or confusion. It was pure, paralyzing terror. I felt like I was in the presence of something profoundly evil. I noped out immediately. I barricaded myself in my buddy's basement bedroom and hid under the blankets until he got home from work.